Hello there. I just noticed a few things. One, in that video, Pete's in the center. On his right is his grandson, Tao. And I used to kind of babysit for him when he was like 6 years old. and and uh, and on his other side is a guy named Guy Davis, who is a really good musician and sort of does country blues stuff. And he used to play this really cool double neck guitar. And anyway, his parents were Ozzie Davis and Ruby Dee, so he kind of grew up with they're both actors, but very prominent civil rights activists too. I wasn't going to be nervous, but I noticed my sister from Baltimore or New York is watching on the Zoom. And so now I'm nervous, maybe a little bit. Anyway, I was born in the mid-50s. I got to keep my distance from this thing, which means that I may be younger than some people here, but I'm older than most people in the world. So, and I didn't grow up in a very musical family. There were some Mitch Miller albums, one Tennessee Ernie Ford album, a Mahalia Jackson album, then some Bert and I comedy records, and Burl Ives. Lots of Burl Ives. But I had a sister born in 1950 and a brother born in 1951, and they kept me from having to stumble around too much. I was inoculated with a fairly healthy dose of Phil Oakes, Tom Paxton, Joan Baez, then later Jack Elliott, Dave Van Ronk, and even Bob Dylan, and of course Pete Seeger. Pete was the strongest link in the chain that connected the new political and socially conscious writers with songs that drove the labor movement and, of course, Woody Guthrie. As a kid, Pete drove me to the library, and others, but mostly Pete songs, to learn about the Fort Hood Three and Lisa Calvage and Michael Schwerner and Andrew Goodman and James Chaney and all these people that, somebody my age would need to know about. So anyway, one summer in the 1970s, after another wasted semester, they were not wasted later on, but I wasn't doing so well at first, I hitchhiked to my parents in Vermont and convinced my younger brother to take the weekend off and to drive to Beacon, New York for a strawberry shortcake festival. Gas was cheap, relatively, I guess, so it was an easy sell. When we pulled into the parking lot, I instantly recognized a tall, thin, bearded guy in his 50s carrying a plastic bag and picking up trash. They say that you shouldn't necessarily want to meet your heroes lest you be disappointed. I certainly was not, but in those first few moments of greetings and small talk, I learned the fundamental wicked nature of Pete Seeger. You see, he didn't have the one bag, but a whole bunch of them looped through his belt. So as we talked, he handed my brother and I each a bag, and we helped pick up trash. Moments later, Pete was gone. We had been given a task by Pete Seeger and could not quit until our bags were full. When we didn't know where to dispose of the bags, we were told to ask that woman over there, pointing to a short Asian woman under a tent. So that was Toshi Seeger. Toshi Seeger was not the woman you saw in the movie A Complete Unknown, if you happen to see that movie. There was nothing quiet or demure about her. She was an absolute force of nature. She had been an organizer for years, and she was probably the only reason you actually know who Pete Seeger is. She was she was the one that smoked cigarettes one after another, and she drank a lot of coffee. Pete hated coffee, ideologically. Anyway, so she organized Pete's life and many other things, one of which was the annual Clearwater Festival, or they used to call it the Great Hudson River Revival, which was the next weekend. She asked what we were doing, and my brother admitted that he had to be at work on Monday. I, however, did not. Somewhere in that short conversation, Toshi had convinced me to stick around and help work on the festival. And that is how I ended up staying in Pete's barn. Not just for the next week, but for the rest of the summer. Crewing some on the Clearwater, helping out, working on parts of a new boat. I spent much of the next 2 summers there as well. I was kind of a bum, but I would show up, and there'd always be, they remember you. They know you know where to sleep. So, and they always had a lot of food. So I'm just going to throw in a few little odd stories from those years, anyway. One time we got up really early in the morning, had to rush down to the river because it was right before one of the festivals, and so we had to sail this 32-foot wood sailboat down from Beacon, New York to Croton. I can't tell you how far that is. It was 30 miles probably. And so we spent the day sailing down there. Well, I drink coffee, and I hadn't had any coffee before we left in the morning. So I'm out there on the river, sunny day. There's about a mile stretch where there was no wind, so we're in irons. We don't have a backup motor there. It was a little solar-powered motor for an emergency. So you got 16-foot oars. So we're rowing this 32-foot sailboat for an hour. And then the wind picked up again, and we got the rest of the way down there. And so late in the day, we pulled into Croton. We're at the dock, and I had a blinding headache by that point. And Pete went off to go to a payphone to call Toshi to come and pick us up. And he came back, even though he knew that this liquid was responsible for destroying all sorts of subsistence farms in Central America, et cetera, et cetera. He still came back with 2 extra large cups of coffee in his hands because he knew that I needed that. Anyway, so that's, and riding home, she didn't come, she had an older Saab. She didn't show up in her Saab. She showed up in Pete's really raggedy old Ford F-150 four-wheel drive pickup truck. Couldn't go over 45 miles an hour. And she showed up in that, and there was a pile of rugs in the back. And somebody else was in the front with Pete, and so Pete and I climbed in the back of the truck, and both of us are like underneath this pile of rugs to keep from freezing on the way home. And that was the trip back. And that's just, this is not, he didn't have a lot of star to him. Another time we sailed down to Yonkers, and we had really bad weather, and we had to people had to stay awake on our watch all night on the boat, and slept on the boat, sort of slept, and it was just soaking wet, and everybody was filthy. And then this organization called River Keepers had this awards breakfast in the morning, so we showed up there just smelly and nasty, and there are all these people in neckties and everything, and it was a nice thing, but it was nice to be filthy with Pete Seeger because it's Pete, so that's okay. So anybody with him, you're just accepted. I had another situation at the Milwaukee Summerfest where I went down, he was playing there, and so I got a message through to Toshi and So I was there, and so I ended up spending the night at the Pfister Hotel, which is a very fancy hotel in Milwaukee. And it was, both of us were out of place there. They had a bottle of wine and a bowl of fruit on the table that were like free, and we didn't touch it. We were afraid they were going to bill us for it or something. And Arlo Guthrie went down to the bar and had a beer, and I didn't know if he'd buy me a beer, and I didn't have the money to buy my own, so I stayed with Pete and didn't go with Arlo. But in the morning, I needed a cup of coffee, and Pete was doing an interview with some public radio station, so I went out the door of the Pfister and went down the street a little bit, and after the way I'd been treated at the Pfister, being with him, I thought, well, I am somebody. And I'm walking down the street, and I tried to ask this man walking down the street where I could get a cup of coffee around there. And he sort of ignored me at first, and I said it again, and he stopped and reached in his pocket. I said, no, I have money. I just want to know where to buy a cup of coffee. He was very happy about that. Okay, that's a few. Let's see, another time there at the harbor where the sailboats would pull in to the dock, and that's where the sloop club is, and there's a park there that used to be a dump. It was full of algae. It was just completely choked up. It was hard to get little boats in there. And so Pete had this idea that we should do like the Chinese, and we should get out there with rowboats, towing them with our hands and wading through the water and rip up all this algae, put it in the boats. And then we'd load it in his pickup truck and haul it away. And so we did that all day. And he had took the pickup truck and they unloaded it in this big pile near his garden because he thought more compost. And so by the time we were done, we went up there and two things happened. One, he realized that, oh yeah, that's right. We had been fighting PCB pollution in the river for years, and I don't really want to use that for compost. But the other thing is, you put a huge pile of algae, I mean, this was like 6 feet tall pile, huge pile. It's hot. It's really hot. You couldn't even go near the garden. That pile was so hot. It was just almost bursting into flames. So that was another little error. And then the last thing is, I was there. Toshi's birthday is on July 1st. And Pete had bought her, this was in 1980, he had bought her a TV, a Sony Trinitron television. It was the first TV they'd ever owned. And she just wanted a TV, so he bought a TV. And I remember, like 2 weeks later, sitting around in their room with about 5 people watching the Republican National Convention as Ronald Reagan was nominated for president. And I thought how odd this is to be in like Seeger's cabin in their bedroom watching him nominated. Anyway, okay, so that's enough. Anyway, most of the world knew Pete through the Weavers in the 1950s, or being blacklisted, or his activism in both civil rights movement and Vietnam War. He was also one of the founders of the Newport Folk Festival that first introduced Joan Baez in 1959, and in 1963 became a decidedly political venue with Phil Oakes, Tom Paxton, Bob Dylan, etc. Even some old labor songwriters and organizers like Jim Garland. Led by Joan Baez, the crowd left the festival grounds and marched past the mansions in Newport, gathering support for the upcoming March on Washington. He's also credited with the version of We Shall Overcome we're familiar with. To be fair to the folk tradition, the song already existed, but he changed will to shall because it sort of sounded better in the mouth, I guess, and added a couple verses. He also wrote If I Had a Hammer with Lee Hayes, and adapted Turn, Turn, Turn from a Bible verse. He wrote several other songs that people just grow up kind of knowing. He wrote kids' songs, protest songs, goofy songs, instrumentals. He wrote seriously complicated tunes and cornball tunes. He played it all on a 5-string banjo that he'd added 3 extra frets to, and a massive, poorly designed 12-string with strings almost as fat as my thumb. That sounded incredible, but it was almost impossible to play. So Pete had a decent voice and was a very good musician. He also wrote some great songs. Many of his civil rights and anti-Vietnam songs are among the very best. However, his greatest skill, and I doubt anyone has matched it, is the skill he showed my brother and I by handing us a couple of trash bags. He could walk on a stage in front of 9,000 people and have them all singing a song practically within seconds. He was the organizer, the facilitator, but not the leader. At some point, he could have sat down and the audience would have finished the song. He made people want to sing. He made people want to pick up the garbage. He made them want to turn dumps into parks. He made them want to take the reins of their world. To quote Woody Guthrie, "I'm out to sing songs that will prove to you that this is your world, and if it's hit you pretty hard and knocked you for a dozen loops, no matter what color, what size you are, how you're built, I'm out to sing the songs that make you take pride in yourself and in your work." I think the quote applied to both Woody Guthrie and Pete in their music, but very much Pete in his work. As a founder of Sing Out magazine in 1950, Pete penned a column under the name Johnny Appleseed Jr., inspired by the original Johnny Appleseed, John Chapman, who traveled the Midwest and Ontario, I think, planting thousands of apple trees. He used the column to introduce new political song lyrics and write about music and politics. Through his life, he became Johnny Appleseed. Always an environmentalist, his focus turned to the Hudson River in the 1960s. In 1947 or 48, he purchased 17 acres of woods on a mountainside with a 180-degree view of the river. The land cost $100 an acre, and he spent another $700 building a cabin, $100 of which was spent on the big picture window, and he was very quick to point that out to everybody. The cabin was one big room with a kitchen and elevated a couple steps. There was a basement, like a cellar below it, but they hadn't dug it very deep because it was all rock. In 1950, when the Weavers had a #1 hit with Goodnight Irene, Pete used the money to dig a well. But they still didn't have an indoor bathroom. So in 1965, when the youngest of their 3 children was 10, they had a local carpenter add a bedroom, bathroom, and a small office area. They also built a cinder block barn. It was during this period of wealth and decadence that Pete and Toshi had the idea to build a big boat that would bring music up and down the river and draw people to the river, hoping to increase efforts to clean it up. By performing more concerts and sucking others into the effort, the Clearwater, a 106-foot gaff-rigged sloop with a 12-foot tiller with a fist carved in the end of it, was launched. Anybody who sails probably understands that the boat was like 76 feet on deck, 106 feet overall, including the bowsprit and everything. But for a boat like that to not have a wheel is pretty unusual. It actually had a tiller, and sometimes it'd take up to like 6 people to push that tiller to change the direction of the boat. At the time of the launch, most towns along the Hudson had a dump along the shore. Raw sewage was pumped directly into the river, and GE had been dumping PCBs in the river since 1947. The Clearwater has been one of the most significant forces in cleaning up the river. The riverfront park that I met Pete at had been a town dump a few years earlier. The next idea was less successful. Pete and Toshi had the idea that by creating a sloop club in every town, they could teach sailing, educate school kids about the river, and turn even more people's focus toward the river. They thought each town should have a replica of the Clearwater on a smaller scale. So we had the Clearwater's designer, Cy Hamlin, draw, probably no relation to you, draw up plans for a 32-foot on-deck version of the Clearwater. Again, 8-foot bowsprit, 40 feet overall. Rather than have fundraisers, Pete made a deal with the devil and signed a 3-record contract with Warner Brothers that gave him the $75,000 up front to have the Woody Guthrie built. He then donated it to the Beacon Sloop Club and started on the next, this time using the ferro cement hull instead of the traditional plank-on-frame wooden hull. I worked a good bit on building that sloop, but I was not responsible for it sinking in 2002. I was nowhere near it. A few years before he died, Pete got to sing This Land Is Your Land at Barack Obama's inauguration, which I'm sure was the first time playing in D.C. when it wasn't a protest. He was 89, and he would still do concerts. He even made a record that year. But most of his efforts remained local. He could be seen regularly on a street corner in Beacon with several other UU members carrying signs in protest of the Iraq War. During those summers, I got to know a bunch of other folkies. Tom Paxton, Arlo Guthrie, Harry Chapin even sailed with us once, Utah Phillips, Steve Goodman, Taj Mahal, Jack Elliott, and I met a bunch more. Many of them were profoundly impacted by Pete and Toshi's commitment. Still other musicians and songwriters working for social and political change over the years have shared that inspiration, from Eric Bogle, Dick Goggin, Tom Morello, Billy Bragg, Jackson Brown, Annie DeFranco, to even 33-year-old Jesse Wells, whether he knows it or not. I've run out of words. So that was the extent of my, I don't know if I went overtime or undertime.
You're doing fine.
All right. Thank you.